By the divine authority of the Templar, you are hereby exiled to the forsaken shores of Reichlast. You have transgressed against God and consorted with sin. Find your redemption, Exile, or die in the attempt.
Yes, the plot and story fall well within the standard category you'd expect of this role-playing game, and it really does wear its heart on its sleeve with its aspirations. Striding face-long into a blizzard means nothing. Yes, it is heading for those Diablo 3 players as much as it can. And possibly, it offers something slightly different here with this open beta we're looking at on the Xbox One. Having been available for a few years now on the PC, it can obviously scale up to whatever your hardware can muster. But here on the Xbox One, we have a different set of limitations. That is 1080p and 60 frames per second. So, pretty much as high as you could expect, but the developers do state there is a dynamic resolution which offers up the same benefits on the Xbox One X, which allows it to go to 4K and 60 FPS using said dynamic resolution scaling. But here on the Xbox One, I'm not seeing anything dip below 1080p from multiple counts in this test. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't dip, because that would be obviously crazy for the developer to create a technique such as dynamic scaling and then not use it. No, it probably is using it, but it's much later and in more dense battles. But for my tested sections here from a few hours of playing this beta, I've not found any points from multiple pixel counted sections that drops below 1080p, and that's a 1920 width as well. So there may be sections later on, and that would be clever to use it, but the Xbox One S certainly seems to hold up slightly better maybe than the standard Xbox One. And performance is just as good. It targets 60 FPS and it hits it nearly pretty much all the time. There is a few occasions where it can dip, but sometimes these come from, again, a very standard feature of these engines, both Diablo and my recent review of Victor Vran on the PS4 on the Pro, which is a very similar title too. It does utilise a similar technique to those titles where it can interleave the animation updates on the frames and the characters themselves. So this can end up giving you a 33 millisecond update at both points. Now, depending on whether you've got any alpha effects updating animation sections or the actual camera movement itself for geometry, it can look like it's dropping frames, but in actual fact it's not. But there are occasional points where it does drop frames where obviously nothing happens at all, but they tend to not go above 33 milliseconds whenever they do, and they are incredibly rare. From over 10 to 15 minutes of tested footage here, I'm not seeing any issues at all. I'm playing much more than that. I'm not feeling any issues at all with the performance itself. So it is a very solid looking title and a very impressive one in the performance stake. And this includes me trying to stress the engine out by gathering as many enemies as I can in one go. Now, the game does seem to run VSync most of the time, but it is an adaptive VSync. Very, very occasionally it can tear, and this is from the whole height of the screen, so it can tear from the top to the bottom. But these again are just as rare as the dips you're seeing in the title. And this is a beta, so there is obviously a lot of room for improvement come the final release. Now, you can see here there are some little issues as well. Again, like I stress, it is a beta. Characters can appear and disappear as you're trying to stress the engine out here from where they are, and also you get some shadow flickering on the shadow maps in certain areas of the game, and also a little bit of flickering on the texture quality and the banding where the seams join on the geometry. But overall, it's a very solid title for a beta of this quality, but this has come from a PC release, so I do feel as if this is a Windows 10 port as much as it is a console port. The sound in the game is serviceable. There's no soundtrack, but there's some nice ambient sounds of footsteps, seagulls in the background, the water splashing against the beaches, and obviously the magic and attacks of the enemies as you hit and smash and everything blows up and falls around you. The dialogue in the game is okay and is delivered reasonably, but it's not going to win any Oscars here for the acting quality, but it certainly does the job admirably, and that's all that's really required. It certainly uses the techniques and the visual quality from their own engine very well indeed. Asset quality is very strong across the board, and even though there is a heavy lack of anti-aliasing in this title, which does give it quite a shimmery edge at certain points, specifically the menu section where you select your character is very edgy indeed. And certainly a little bit of MSA would not go amiss here to clean up those edges, but that lack of anti-aliasing also helps the visual quality, with it looking very sharp and crisp at all times as you play. Keeping the specular tones reflective areas on surfaces and water, for example, is the key here to keeping it quite minimal. There is obviously points where the specular alpha effects do show up on the shader aliasing, but overall it's quite clean considering it is lacking quite heavily in the AA. So I do recommend that they work on maybe a post-process solution, improve the one that they're trying to implement in the engine here, or they simply add in some MSAA to improve those edges. But overall, because of the view distance and the distance away from the objects, they get away with the quality here because the textures can actually show quite high detail because you're not able to push them and squash them up against your face. There's a good mixture here of shaded quality. Certainly the water has some nice shader effects, with speck and reflection over the water edges and the normal map usage on depth. And for a 60 FPS title, shadow quality in Shadow Cascade is very good, with shadow maps with a soft edge around them. Even though they are of low quality resolution, they do get away with it, again due to the distance away from the object. And in comparison, something like Diablo, it does have a much slightly closer, bigger look to it, with bigger characters and bigger objects on scene. You're a little bit closer to the action, so you do get much bigger geometry models and enemies in the title, including yourself. And Diablo has a kind of flat, blander texture material look that this has here, but this again does rely heavily on just using specular tones to give that reflectance, rather than really doing any PBR work at all. But it really does aim at that Diablo style, and that's exactly what you get from the box. You jump into the title, you start off with pretty much nothing, pick your character type, and then move in. Once you pick up certain weapons and abilities, you can then improve your quality, obviously add in magic, you've got easily boostable health, and you can play it online with multiple friends and go through quests. Enemy variation in the game is quite vast, with lots of monsters, creatures, weird, wonderful, magical abilities in the title, and you can boost your abilities, mix up your controls on the control pad and attack, swipe, use magic, and obviously boost certain weapons in the game along with your own personal abilities. So there's certainly a lot of scope here to expand and while away the hours. The Xbox One release here will have all of the additional package that was available on the PC up until the last release, so that's 10 chapters I believe overall, so it's quite an expansive title. And again, this is free to play, with the only restriction on buying additional benefits using microtransactions, so you can enjoy this when it releases finally on the Xbox One later in the year, or dive into it on PC right now. And if you're bored or had enough of Diablo and want to try something new, then you can't really go wrong with a free to play game, and if you don't like it, then you can just delete it and move on to something else. I certainly recommend giving it a go if you're into these style of games. It's certainly a refreshing change visually, and Grinding Gear Games, their very first title and engine, is an impressive one on that stance and the performance. Even if they didn't jump in and use Unity and Unreal Engine 4, this may have limited them slightly with the physics side of it, but it's quite rigid and old school in that regard. But then, realistically, so is Diablo. Anyway, as always, if you enjoyed this or anything else that I've put together on my website, then please feel free to like and subscribe below. Leave all your thoughts and feedback below, and I'll see you very soon on the next one.